Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Strike, and today I'm here to talk to you about the Dragon Priest. Now, this is a deck that I've been playing with quite a bit lately, and I've been having a great time with it and a great amount of success. Now, the idea of the Dragon Priest isn't new, but I've made a couple of modifications, and I really like where the deck has taken me so far. So, let's hop into it and talk about what makes a Dragon Priest an interesting deck to play. It all centers around Shadow form right here. Now, as you can see by the description, your hero power becomes deal 2 damage. If already in Shadow form, 3 damage. And that sounds exactly like it is. I have 2 Shadow forms in my deck. I could potentially make my hero power do 3 damage every turn for 2 mana cost. This has a huge amount of value and it completely changes the way the priest is played as a result. It's basically like having the hunter's hero power, except better, because instead of just doing damage to the enemy themselves, you can also kill off their minions that they put down, and being able to do 3 damage to any minion they drop down for a cost of 2 is pretty awesome. So let's start at the very beginning up here. Now, Holy Smite, as you see here, will do 2 damage to any minion for 1 mana, and that in itself is quite nice, and it's very good to have in your deck. I always have this card in my priest decks because, honestly, 1 cost for 2 damage, great early game removal, and sometimes even late game it could just be that extra 2 damage that you need to finish something off. Power Word Shield. Now this I usually combine with Wild Pyromancer because Wild Pyromancer is an awesome card. It's one of my favorite cards right now. Basically, you use Power Word Shield on the Wild Pyromancer, gives it 4 HP instead of 2, while also simultaneously hitting everything on the board for 1 damage. And now you can basically heal it back up to 4 whenever you want. It makes it that much more difficult to kill off. So this combination is very good for cheap removal because your only AoE is your Holy Nova otherwise, and at 5 mana cost, it's very expensive. Usually when you're up against like a Zoo Warlock or something along those lines, by the time you get to turn 5 and you can use Holy Nova, you're dead anyway. So if you have a Wild Pyromancer in your hand on as early as turn 3, you can basically start using this. Or if you have a coin, you can use it as early as turn 2. So it's really good to have these in your deck for that cheap removal. Then of course, you have Shadow Word Pain. This is pretty much a standard in priest decks, and this in itself is a nice card. Remove any minion with 3 or less attack for 2, and then of course you have Shadow Word Death, destroy a minion with an attack of 5 or more. Now, if you know anything about priests, you know that the weakness in this regard is dealing with minions that have 4 HP, like the Azure Drake. These are a pain for priests to deal with. You can either drop 2 of the Holy Smites on it or something else, but it's usually very difficult for you to just get rid of something with 4 HP. Enter the Crazed Alchemist. This card you might think, well, this isn't very good. It's a 2/2 and it swaps the attack and health of a minion. But how about a 4/6 or a 4/5? Now you swap their HP and all of a sudden Shadow Word Death works on them. I like to save this and keep this in my hand because you never know when they're going to drop something where, you know, they're thinking, oh, well, you know, this guy only has 4 life. He's not going to be able to do anything about this. Well, or 4 attack, I should say, and 6 life. And then you drop the Crazed Alchemist on it and bam, removed. And now you've got a 2/2 on the board for 2, and you've removed their minion with Shadow Word Death. So it works. It's kind of a roundabout way of removing a minion. You're using 2 cards to remove 1, so not the most cost efficient, but there's definitely been situations where I found this to be extremely useful, and I'm glad to have it in my deck. Of course, Loot Hoarder gives you some of that card draw that you very badly need for this deck. We've already talked about Wild Pyromancer, Shadow Word Death, Shadow Form. Now the interesting thing about Shadow Form is if you have enough mana, remember these are 3 costs each. Let's say you have both Shadow Forms in your hand. You can use your hero power to heal yourself or a minion for 2. Then you can use a Shadow Form for 3. Now it's 5 mana used. But now you can go ahead and use Shadow Form, your hero power, again and do 2 damage to a minion. Now that's 7 of your mana used. Then you can go ahead and use Shadow Form again, and that's 10. And now the next turn you can do 3 damage for 2 to anything. So basically it's very, very nice to have. Then of course, Earthen Ring Farseer. Now when you're in Shadow Form, you can't heal yourself anymore because your hero power has been converted to deal 2 damage. So the Earthen Ring Farseer is quite nice to have in your hand because you drop him down, you restore 3 health to yourself. He's a 3/3 for 3, pretty cheap. It's just an all-around good card in my opinion. The Ascension Shieldmaster, also a very good card, 4 for a 3/5. This is a cost-efficient card in my opinion, usually kind of a pain to deal with, and especially if you have a power word shield in your hand and you drop it on him, well, now he's a 3/7, even more of a pain to deal with. And they usually have to use some sort of removal or drop a card on it or something along those lines to get him off the field. And it's good for protecting your little guys early on. And then of course, Holy Nova. Deals 2 damage to all enemies and restores 2 health to all friendly characters. This is a nice card to have in the deck. I don't recommend running a deck as Priest without this card because you will just get absolutely pummeled by anybody that runs a Zoo deck or anything similar, usually Rush decks and such as well. You're going to need this to counter Hunters and Warlocks especially, and sometimes even Druids. I've seen them run decks where they're basically like the Zoo Warlock except the Druid version. So having this in your deck, absolutely necessary, especially the 2 HP also restores life to yourself, not just minions. So again, if you're in Shadow Form, you're going to want to supplement your healing a little bit with these other cards. Azure Drake, it's an all-around good card. It can buff your Holy Nova, and it draws you a card. Always good to have these in your deck. Now, some people prefer to take these out because, you know, it is a 4/4 for 5, and it's very often just straight up removed by the enemy as soon as you drop it. You very rarely get to actually make use of this card unless you drop it late game and combine it with a Holy Nova immediately after that or with something else. Holy Fire, again, you're going to want something else in your deck to supplement your healing, and this is a good card for it. It deals a flat 5 damage for 6 and heals you for 5. So I like having this in my deck. The Cabal Shadow Priest, it's a 4/5 for 6, so not the most cost efficient card here, but it allows you to take control of an enemy minion that has 2 or less attack. Now you might think, well, 2 or less, like how is that useful? Well, there's certain cards that other classes have where, for example, if a minion dies, they get buffed, or something along those lines, and you can just straight up steal their card. I've used this to great effect to steal cards that, like, for example, on the Hunter, there's a card that is a 2/5 and gives all of your minions charge as soon as they're played. I just steal that from the Hunter, and now all of my minions have charge, which is absolutely fantastic for me to have as a Priest. And being that it's a 2/5, it's kind of difficult to kill off unless the Hunter burns one of his hard removal cards on it. So I've gotten good value out of this card, and I usually try and save it for the right moment. Playing this card willy-nilly will not really get you anything, and it'll probably be just removed otherwise. But when you steal a card from the enemy, it can tip the scale in your favor. And so I like having in my deck, but only 1. I don't think 2 is really great to have, because if you have 2, then you usually end up with one of them being a dead card. So just 1 is enough. Sunwalker, I like these guys because they're very, very difficult to remove. The only exception is, as you can see here, and this is why I have this up, the Blood Knight. Divine Shield, gain +3/+3 for each shield lost. So if you have 2 of these Sunwalkers out in the field and they drop a Blood Knight on you, then that Blood Knight automatically becomes a 9/9 immediately. And while you can remove it with Shadow Word Death, you lose your Divine Shields, and this makes your Sunwalkers vulnerable to everything else. So that is the risk you take. However, not a lot of people do run Blood Knight actually, so you're generally pretty safe. And in order to actually remove this card, they usually have to run 2 cards into it, either 2 removal cards or 2 creatures at least, to get it out of the way. And then of course you can just drop another one if you haven't already. I try to not play both of them at the same time, because when you play both at the same time, it leaves you open to all kinds of fun removal stuff, especially when up against a mage. You know, they can basically ping them down, or they can drop a blizzard on you, and then they can go ahead and flame strike after that, especially if they have something on the field to buff up their spell damage. So you have to be very wary when playing your taunts. You don't have a lot of them in this deck. You want to use them very carefully, and that's what this deck is all about. It's all about strategizing and playing your cards as efficiently as possible. And while you can say that about any deck, it's very important with this deck, because if you don't, one mistake, one minion loss that could have otherwise been prevented could lose you the game. You can kind of recover with other deck builds and other classes, but not with this one. This one is all about going to the face, going hard, going fast, and you need to not waste damage and not waste damage potential. So there you go. Now, Prophet Velen, I like this guy. He doubles the damage and healing of your spells and hero power. This can be combined with Shadow Form to make your Shadow Form potentially do 6 damage for 2 cost every single turn that he is on the field. It can make your Holy Fire do 10 damage and heal you for 10. It can make your Holy Nova automatically do 4 damage to all enemy minions. It's just insane how awesome he synergizes with this deck. He's very, very strong, and he's a 7/7, so he's susceptible to Big Game Hunter, Assassinate, and all of the other hard removal cards that other classes do have. But really, if you can protect him and if you can keep him on the field, absolutely worth having. Now, if you don't have Prophet Velen, you can also substitute Alexstrasza into this deck, and Alexstrasza can kind of supplement your healing if you have already swapped to Shadow Form. I've had games where I've been down to 4 HP, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna die, and I draw Alexstrasza, and I just drop Alexstrasza, bring myself back up to 15, and win the game. But I swapped over to Prophet Velen after I got enough to craft him, and I was like, alright, let's give this a whirl, and I really liked it. It goes really well with the theme of this deck, of just hitting them in the face as hard as possible, and just controlling the board and preventing them from doing stupid things. I really like this deck because it just really handles the control decks and the zoo decks very, very well. The only time I ever really have issues with them is when I have bad card draw for the situation that I'm in, or if they have very good card draw and it's turn 4 or 5 and there's just nothing that I could have done before then to really keep myself in the game. Now, Ragnaros the Fire Lord, always a solid card to have in the deck, in my opinion. He's an 8/8 for 8, and as soon as you drop him on the board and end your turn, he does 8 damage to a random enemy or straight to the face if you're lucky. Now, I usually try and have the board cleared off before I drop him, so he's kind of a finisher for me. I'll get them down to pretty low HP, and I'll drop Ragnaros and just hit him in the face for 8, and usually at this point in the game they don't have anything to counter it, or if they do, well, they've already taken 8 damage to the face, and I can usually finish them off from there, either with Shadow Form or other minions otherwise. So, again, very solid card to have in your deck, and I recommend it, but you could also try subbing out Ragnaros for an Alexstrasza if you want to add a bit more healing or, damage potential, because you could drop Alexstrasza and do up to 30 damage to the enemy, or not, up to 15 damage to the enemy with Alexstrasza in one turn if you so desire, but I get more value out of Ragnaros in this deck, in my opinion. Now, of course, Mind Control. Mind Control is kind of an awesome card, but it's iffy too because it's 10 cost. So you can't even play the card until turn 9 with a coin or turn 10 without a coin. And to be honest, there's games where it gets no use because either I don't get to turn 10 and I've either beaten them, or I do lose occasionally with this deck, or basically there's nothing for me to mind control at that point because the board is clear. So it sometimes does end up being a dead card, but in my opinion it's still worth having in the deck, because oftentimes when we do get to that point in the game, they're saving something big, either their own Alexstrasza or something along those lines. They're gonna drop it, and Mind Control is awesome. I've even had a game where another priest mind controlled my Ragnaros, and I was like, oh no! And then I just mind controlled him back, and I won the game. So it's awesome for situations like that too. Very much worth having in your deck. So all in all, the theme of this deck, again, is just going hard. Either you can play the sustain game and kind of see how it goes early on, or if you get a Shadow Form, which I always try and get a Shadow Form in my hand early on, then you can switch to Shadow Form right away and have removal instantly as soon as turn 2 of the coin or turn 3 otherwise, and just start nuking everything they drop on the board, which, again, if they have Murlocs and such, it's really nice to have that. So this deck, very strong. The only real weaknesses is basically if they have a lot of minions early on and you haven't gotten a Holy Nova yet. Holy Nova is kind of your key removal, and if you don't have a Wild Pyromancer and spells or a Holy Nova and you can't remove those cards, then you have very few options. It doesn't have a lot of control otherwise. So if you go up against a Zoo Warlock or a class like a Druid that has the ability to play a lot of small cards instantly and then buff them all up, then you could be at a disadvantage there. You don't really have anything like armor or any sort of protection. You need to rely on your taunts and basically your couple of removals with your Wild Pyromancer and your Holy Nova. So that is the weakness there, but I found against other classes like Hunter, Mage, Paladin, other Priests, Rogues, and even Shamans, it's been a very effective deck. Now, there's different decks that it will be weak against with each class, but all in all, it's very solid. I recommend trying it out. It's a lot of fun, and I'll post up a game here soon so you guys can check out the deck and see it in action. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and feel free to post some comments below if you have any questions, comments, or anything along those lines about the deck. Thanks again for watching, and this is Striketh, checking out.